welcome y bienvenidos a todos. My name is Trey Johnston. I'm the Associate Director of the Cisneros Hispanic Leadership Institute here at GW, which is the host of the LatinXpression series. The LatinXpression series was created to amplify literature, film, art, and cultural production by and about Latino, Latina, Latinx, Latine creators and exploring their place within art and academic inquiry. And we're really excited to be hosting today's guest speaker, Edgar Gomez, alongside the Department of Romance, German, and Slavic Languages and Literatures here at GW. It feels particularly appropriate that Edgar will be discussing their memoir, High Risk Homosexual, today at the intersection of National Coming Out Day and the last week of Latinx and Hispanic Heritage Month. So I think that I'm excited to hear that. But before we begin what I'm sure will be an excellent conversation, I want to first introduce tonight's conversation partners with Edgar, Professors Manuel Cuellar y Ofelia Montelongo. Ofelia Montelongo is a visiting Spanish instructor with RGSLL here at GW, as well as a bilingual writer herself, whose work has earned her recognition as a PEN America Emerging Voice Fellow. And Dr. Manuel Cuellar is an assistant professor of Spanish literature, also at RGSLL, and of course, an affiliate faculty member of the Cisneros Hispanic Leadership Institute. Among his wonderful scholarship on performance studies and on Mexican literary and cultural studies, a quick plug that he also recently released a book, Choreographing Mexico, Festive Performances and Dancing Histories of a Nation, which you can read now. So thank you, Manuel and Ofelia, for organizing today's event, and I'll hand it over to both of you.
Thank you so much, Ray. Thank you so much, Edgar. Thank you so much, Manuel, for being here. Thank you to all of the students who are signing up. Thank you to the Cisneros Institute for hosting us today. And first of all, I want to read a little bit of the bio of Edgar Gomez, who we have the pleasure of having today. And again, we're going to show up the book. Go and buy it in your favorite independent bookstore if you can, if you're able to. And Edgar Gomez is a Florida-born writer with roots in Nicaragua and Puerto Rico. A graduate of University of California, Riverside's MFA program, and he's a recipient of the 2018 McCrean Graduate Award in Nonfiction Writing. His work has been published and anthologized in many places, and it's way too long the list to list it over here. And he lives in Queens, New York, where he's saving for a good lotion. I asked you that last time. I don't know if the good lotion is here, but you'll tell me in a minute. And his memoir, High Risk Homosexual, was called A Breath of Fresh Air by the New York Times. And Edgar's book was released earlier this year. So everyone, please clap. We're in Zoom, but I hope everyone is clapping for Edgar. So bienvenido, welcome. And first of all, besides, welcoming everyone and to the students as well that we have over here, feel free. We have a Q&A section down there for you to ask any questions that you want to Edgar, and that we're gonna have time at the end to ask him. So let's start with two questions. It's a two-part questions that I wanted to ask you about your title. I know your title is the name of one of your essays, but besides that, can you tell us a little bit about your title? Were you always clear about it? And welcome, Edgar.
Well, hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. Happy National Coming Out Day. Yeah, if you're gay, yay. I don't know. Thank you. And your question was about the title. So I didn't always have the title. My original title was kind of boring. It was gonna be called Boys Club, but every time I would, which is another chapter in the book, but every time I would tell somebody that title, you could just see how bored they look. And I was like, all right, I gotta figure something out. And it was like around that time I was in college, that I went to my college health center to get PrEP, which is the one-a-day pill that you take that reduces your risk of contracting HIV by basically 100%. And on my prescription, it said high risk homosexual. And at first I was like so mad. I was like, what is that? I'm not a high risk homosexual. This is crazy. But then I was like, you know what, this is kind of funny. And so I was like, I'm just gonna make this the title of my book because yeah, I was kind of reclaiming it, I guess.
Amazing, amazing. I love that story because titles tell us everything. It kind of tell us, if we're gonna pick up a book pretty much or not, right? And yours is just amazing,
Thank you. And I was kind of, a lot of people were like, oh, I hope they don't make you change it. I hope that they don't, make you turn it into something else. And my press was really cool. And they never even like had a conversation with me about it or anything at all. They just like right away were just like accepting of it. And the reason why that's like cool, I guess, is because, my book says homosexual in giant letters on the cover. And that like can turn off a lot of people, even queer people. Like I can think of like when I was 13 in the closet, I don't know that I would have carried a book that says homosexual. So even for queer people, it's like kind of like a scary title. But yeah, they let me have it.
And that's amazing because that's been, like I heard that a lot, that a lot of the publishers, they change your title to make it more commercial, to make it more appealing to everyone. So I'm so glad that they let you, have it, that's so great. And I wanted to ask you another question just to start us as well. And can you tell us a little bit about the process of writing your memoir?
Sure. So this took me like 7 years to write. And the reason that it took me that long is because when I first started writing, I didn't really know what I was doing. Like I didn't know on a craft level what I was doing, meaning like I didn't know what a story arc was. I wasn't thinking about like conflict or anything like that, or like structure. I was just kind of like writing what was happening. And I wasn't like, I don't know, I guess pulling out of whatever was happening to like comment on what was going on or anything. It was almost like just like a diary entry. And over time, as I started learning more and more, then I had to go back and revise. I also stopped writing for like a long period. After I graduated from undergrad, I just went back to working at the flip-flop shop for a long time. And I didn't really pick up writing again until I started grad school. So yeah, it took me a really long time. Hopefully the next one doesn't take me 7 years.
Well, thank you, Edgar, once again for being with us today on National Coming Out Day. Yes, for all the queer Latinx, Latine, and I wanted to ask a little bit more about that. So your memoir is about sex, patriarchy, relationships, identity. And can you please tell us more about how queerness and Latinidad, this intimate relationship, right, form and inform each other in your process of writing?
I mean, I would say that they inform each other both in my writing, but just in my life in general. One of the first spaces where those two things really intersected was in Orlando when I was going to gay bars on Latin night. Before that, I was obviously still queer, but I wasn't like, I don't know, I wasn't able to like fully express my queerness. But once I was in these safer spaces where I could be like as, queer and as Latinx as I wanted, those two things started merging. Yeah.
Yes, and now that you're talking about the nightclub, and even though that's another question that I had, I want you to talk to us a little bit more about that, especially because you write about polls, which is so important for queer Latinx individuals. That tragedy, right? There's a lot of pain. So can you please share with us your experience and process of writing about pain, loss, memory, mourning in regards to polls? I mean, there's this beautiful essay, this homage. There used to be a gay bar. It's titled "Honoring the Memory of People Who Were Brutally Assassinated," and this certainly marked all of our community. So, was that a different? How different was writing in this essay chapter about polls?
It was really hard, and it was also very healing, and it was also kind of like traumatizing as I was doing it in weird, unexpected ways. And by what I mean by that is that, so I've written about Pulse a lot and in a lot of different ways. Right after the shooting happened, I was writing about it, just because I didn't know what else to do. And writing has always been like the thing that I guess makes me feel better, and the thing that helps me figure out, my complicated thoughts about whatever is going on. And so I was writing about it immediately. And I was just writing about grief at first, and how I was like coping with grief, hoping that that might be useful to somebody else. Later on, I started having other questions. I think I was a little bit more, I was at a healthier place to ask myself questions like, what was going on through the shooter's mind? Like, why would he do something like that? In the days after, I wasn't like in the mood to ask myself that. And so later on, yeah, I started asking myself those things. That's when it got weirdly traumatizing. I'm like smiling and laughing, but only because it's like so weird in that the essay in the book took a lot of research, because I really wanted to know a lot about the shooter's life. And a lot of the research I did was online, typing out his name, blah, 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 reading whatever news articles came out. And because the internet is weird, and because of the algorithm, I would like go on Facebook and it would be like, suggested friend, Omar Mateen. And there would be shit like that where it's like, I couldn't have possibly predicted that that would happen. And yeah, it was just super, super bizarre. Yeah. There's this common piece of writing advice that I don't believe in. That is, you should write from the scar, not the wound. Meaning that if you're writing about something like traumatic, some kind of a harm, that you should wait till you've healed enough to write about it. And I do think that there is some validity to that piece of advice, because oftentimes waiting a little bit allows you to see whatever happened through fresh eyes and through a different perspective than from the perspective of it just happened, when your emotions are just like, running like wild. So for example, if you're like writing about like a breakup, if you write about it the next day, you're just going to be so angry, and you're probably going to make the other person look like the villain. And it's just going to be like really emotional. The reason I don't necessarily believe in this advice is because I like emotional writing, and sometimes those things are great. And so I was writing about it both when it was a wound, and I was writing about it when it was closer to being a scar. I'm not sure, I don't know if it ever will fully be a scar, especially because after Pulse, it's like every other day there's another shooting. And so there's like no opportunity for the wound to heal. So I'm just like, I've been writing about it from a bunch of different perspectives. Yeah, trying to make sense of it, I guess, still.
Yes, writing definitely as a process, right? But but as a space for healing, and I think it's very crucial. And I want to take us from this process of writing to this other side, which is the side of reading, and in particular, curious about your complex relationship between you and your mom. And I'm a mama's boy, right? So what was your mom's reaction when she read your book? How did, you talk a lot about the silence, the pretending, the lack of language. I totally identify and relate with that. How to talk to mom about my queerness, right? and the language that makes that sense of identity and belonging or lack thereof, right? So tell us a little bit more about your mom writing, her reading it, her reactions to it.
Yeah, that was also really complicated. Something tells me if this goes on YouTube, she's probably gonna watch it. Y solo le quiero decir, mamá, la quiero mucho. Y para este video ahorita. The truth is, so when I was writing the book, for various reasons, I never really thought that she would read it. Some of those reasons were I didn't think that my book was gonna get published, because there aren't that many queer Latinx memoirs, and the ones that aren't, you know, Nicaraguan, right?
That's
And
right.
so I was already like, I'm just doing this for myself pretty much. And that's not to say I didn't have confidence in my writing, it's that I didn't have confidence in the publishing industry.
Yeah.
On top of that, I don't know that my family like super reads that much. So even if it did get published, I was like, I don't know that they're gonna find it. I didn't think that if it did get published, it would be like successful enough to like be on their radar. And then even if it like all of the, you know, planets aligned, it's in English and they mostly read in Spanish. So I was like, for all these reasons, it's never gonna really get to them. And so that weirdly freed me to be as honest and authentic as possible in my storytelling, in a way that I am now like, oh my God, I should have lied. I should have sugarcoated some stuff. Because cut to, my book was published, my mom read it, and I was like, oh my God, she knows all my like secrets now, and it's like really mortifying. But she was really, really cool about it, in a way that I don't know if it should have surprised me. It did surprise me, but like my mom has always been very, very like loving.
Yeah.
Even at her, like what I've interpreted as like her being really angry at me, I think I still knew that that anger was motivated by love, in some way. I feel like bell hooks would drag me for that, because
Yes.
but yeah, she was really cool about it. The one thing, and this is why I told her, the one thing that she was kind of upset about was that I said that, you know, she used to steal coffee from Starbucks. And she was like, I don't know why you were telling people that. And I want to like again tell her, Mama, Starbucks no está leyendo mi libro. Like, no. You're never gonna know. Like, you're gonna be fine.
Ya no roban lo suficiente.
It's sorry. Yeah, but now that I'm writing my second book, I feel like I have to go back and navigate all of these things that memoirists usually do, which is like, how do I write about my family? How do I be fair? Because before I was like, oh, they're never gonna see this. And now I'm like, oh, maybe they will see this. And so this time it's I feel like I'm learning how to do all this, you know. It's weird.
Creating a reading public, that's major. Thank you. Okay.
That's amazing. Thank you, Edgar. And I totally understand. I so connect with, you know, los trapos sucios se lavan en casa, you know, of my family. I went into nonfiction and my family is not really happy about it as well. You know, it's like, why are you talking about this? I never say that, you know. That's why I love when, you know, at the beginning of the book, you say, please don't sue me. You know, I'm writing this with, you know, the best of my capabilities, you know. So I really love that, because we have that comedy elements, you know, just right away. And that's one of the emotions that I have from your book. I mean, your book is definitely a roller coaster of emotions. You know, we have grief, we have, you know, humanizing the shooter. We have many emotions happening. But the narrative voice of comedy is one of the ones that I fell in love with, because it's just, we're talking about something, you know, like really heavy topics, and And all of a sudden, we are talking about faking a boyfriend, imaginary condoms, turning a wheel to get a discount. Like we have all of these, elements that they're just fascinated. And I just want to talk, I just want you to ask you a little bit more about that intersection between braiding memoir humor and that cultural critique. Just tell us a little bit of that, if it was like always in your writing or if it's just naturally happening. Just tell us.
Well, I guess I was thinking of audience and I was like, in my wildest dreams, a queer Latinx kid is gonna pick up my book. And I'm talking about a lot of depressing things and I don't really want them to leave feeling depressed. At the same time, I also didn't want to like sugarcoat anything or lie to them. Because I was like, what if I just like pretend everything is like sunshine and rainbows? Then they go out and like confront the real world where, there is still a lot of homophobia, there is still a lot of racism. And so I was like, how do I navigate this? I can tell you the like comedy, I've been trying to figure it out, like how to write it, because now that I'm writing my second book, I'm just like, damn, this shit is depressing. How do I make it funny? And I'm realizing that a lot of the comedy doesn't come, for me at least, from the in the moment narrator, the narrator that's like experiencing everything. It comes from the future narrator looking back and reflecting. And so that's like, once I figured that out, it sort of helped unlock how to imbue comedy into something that's kind of like depressing. And I also really wanted to include comedy. I'm laughing because it feels so like pretentious for me to be like, comedy. But for me, it was also just like a subliminal way to let the reader know that even in the darkest like scenes, I clearly made it out and far enough in my life that I can look back and laugh. And so in that way, I was sort of trying to offer hope, like little trails of hope along the way.
I love the trails of hope. That was, that's my favorite part. And I want to invite again everyone in the audience, because we're almost halfway. So if you can add, if you have any questions, just to put them in the Q&A chat. I just want to remind everyone that you have that that option over there. But thank you for sharing that. And you have been mentioning your second book, and I wanted to ask you at the end, so you don't feel pressure to tell us all about it, but I'm gonna ask you, don't worry about it, because you've been mentioning that you're working on it. So I have so many questions about it, but we'll see if we have time so you can tell us a little bit. But you mentioned before a little bit about the narrative arc, how you, before you were, like writing as a diary, writing your stories, and how eventually you started like talking about how to make conflict, how to make this memoir work, even if it wasn't a novel, to make an arc. And I remember in one other interview that you mentioned how fear was part of that narrative arc of your book. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that, and how fear works in your book, and how do we acknowledge the fear and how to write without or with it.
Yeah, so before I knew that I was like writing a memoir, I was kind of just writing like random stories, random nonfiction stories. And one of the stories that I already had, and I was hoping to like write a collection of stories, without like a big narrative arc. And they were all just going to be like random stories that, had to do with gay stuff. One of the stories that I had that I already thought, oh, I want this to be the first chapter of my collection, was the first chapter of this book, Malcriado, which is one of the stories where I think fear is probably most present for me, just because I was 13 years old. I was in this really uncomfortable situation. I basically thought my life was over. I was like really in denial about my queerness. And through things that happened in that chapter, I figured out I'm definitely queer. And I was like, okay. Well, and then later on, when basically I went to grad school and I was like, hey, I want to write a collection of just gay stories. And one of my professors was like, you can't really do that. You kind of need a narrative arc. I was like, oh, okay. What is my narrative arc then? And then I thought, okay, where's this book beginning? It's opening with fear. It's opening with shame. And I'm currently at a place in my life where I'm not going to lie and say I'm not afraid or ever ashamed, but I feel a lot more proud than I was before. Maybe the journey is going to be from shame to pride. And so once I figured out that as like my arc, I basically went in and like shaded it in. I was like, okay, what are some stories that I can tell that can show my progression from where I started to where I am now as it relates to queerness and shame and Latinidad. Yeah. So basically it's just like asking yourself, you know, where does your story begin? Where does your story end? Or, I mean, these are questions that most writers ask themselves when they're writing, like if it's fiction, it's like, how does this character transform from the beginning to the end of this, you know, whether it's a story or it's a novel. I basically had to treat myself as like a fictional character in that way.
Amazing, thank you, Manuel.
You know, I was also thinking of some sort of the same theme, because the very last line of your sentence of your memoir is what you do when you are not afraid anymore is the same thing you do when you are. Keep going. And I think that, talk about trails of hope there. And one of the things that I really loved about your writing, about your work, and teaching it and discussing it with my students is this whole idea of, you know, to write from a place of precarity, vulnerability, right? Sharing so much of these vulnerable memories with us. And I never felt, Edgar, like a voyeur. Quite the contrary. I was able to identify with, to relate to your experience precisely because of these various moments of vulnerability throughout the entire book, right? So now that has turned into a comment since you have addressed this time and again, but you know, one of the things that I guess connecting it back to what you just mentioned at the beginning in your answer about Pulse is how not to be afraid to occupy that wound, as Ansaltua will say, right? And to write from the wound and not from the scar. So this is turning to be more like, can you share with us a little bit more about, you know, how is it to inhabit that wound without losing yourself in that, in sort of, yeah, from that place of, you know, in that place, because you were able to come out, but, you know, tell us.
So I would say getting vulnerable for me is kind of the point of writing, or it's probably what like most attracts me to writing and to reading. I'm like a very avoidant person. Like when something bad happens, I kind of just, you know, keep it pushing. And a big reason for that is just this machista culture that I grew up in, where, you know, people who are like perceived as boys, you know, aren't allowed to be emotional. You can't talk about your feelings. You have to man up. You have to be strong. And that's just kind of the mindset that I grew up in, where, yeah, something bad would happen and I would just, you know, move on. And what I realized, both from just my life and from even from writing about my life, because, you know, just seeing my life, you know, as words on a page, I was like, I was able to like see patterns. I was like, oh, you don't actually move on. What happens is all of these things start like, you know, boiling inside of you. And you end up having all of these like really aggressive outbursts. Or you just, drink a lot. Which is the other thing machista culture teaches you. You can't be emotional, but you can drink your feelings. And so I was able to see that once I saw my life as words on a page. And so to answer your question, regarding vulnerability, writing forced me to sit down with whatever it is that I was trying to avoid for hours a day, for weeks, for 7 years. And so I really had to process everything. And so that's what I mean about that's the vulnerability is what attracts me to writing. It's because it offers me a safe space to do that in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if I just could follow up very, very quickly, and then we'll open it up. If I also have one more question, I will open it up to the Q&A. We have several questions already, but I have to ask you about, these different models of masculinity, this idea of machismo, and going from Nicaragua, your experience with your tios, your primos, your brother, right? And could totally relate to that. These hyper masculine figures in one's lives, right? And then your own sense of queerness. Certainly while attending, the Latin night at Pulse, drag culture, falling asleep at the convention in Los Angeles. I love that. I love that you fell asleep. And then Riverside. Oh my God, talk about SoCal. And that sense of masculinity, very unique to Southern California and to Riverside in particular. So that experience of waiting for the club, I think I've been to that club myself, and it's just yes. Yeah, tell us about these different notions of masculinity that have, in a way, are peppered throughout this homosexual.
And I think, to speak on Riverside, so there's this scene in this book where I go to this, in the book where, where I go to this gay bar in Riverside, Menagerie. So after the Pulse shooting, I basically could not be in Orlando anymore. Like I said, I'm just a big avoidant. And when it came to Pulse, it was just something that I could not avoid. I would, there would be a Pulse bumper sticker on every car. Everybody would have a Pulse t-shirt on. Every store would have a hashtag Orlando Strong, flyer on the window. Even McDonald's on their, where they say what food they're serving, they had hashtag Orlando Strong. It was just everywhere. And then among my friends too, it was all anybody could talk about, understandably so. And so going to Riverside, and in my mind, I didn't know anything about Riverside except what it was called. I was like, Riverside, I was like, okay, I'm gonna go there and I'm basically gonna start over and it's gonna be fresh, a fresh start and all this. Cut to, one of my, I think it was my first or second month, I went to this gay bar, the Menagerie. I guess I realized pretty quickly it was really stupid of me to move to Riverside and to in this period of intense grief to alienate myself from my entire support system. Yeah, I went to this gay bar Menagerie, and long story short, they wouldn't let me in because they said I looked like somebody else who had caused trouble there before. And this is what I mean about you don't really ever just move on from the things, it all just starts simmering inside. Because I I had the meltdown with security, and I was like, you don't know me, you don't know I came here all the way from, and I was just sobbing, and I was just a mess. And then the people coming out of the bar next door were giggling, and I was like, I know I look wild right now, but I don't know how to stop this. And I think once I was writing that story and I saw that on the page, that's when I was like, oh wait, that's when I had that epiphany where oh, you can't just avoid things forever. It's all gonna come to that boiling point eventually.
Yeah.
I totally forgot your your original
No, that's
question.
totally fine. Like, because we got to hear about this. One of the very important moments in this book, in your memoir, and also when you got labeled a high-risk homosexual while in Riverside, right?
Mhm.
Yes. Okay.
Edgar, now the time has come when we have to ask you about your second book, because the audience, the Q&A, they're asking about it, and we all have questions about it. So tell us whatever you can tell us right now.
I can tell you that I'm working really hard on it. It's so hard, especially because I feel like I have a lot of pressure to like do it quickly, while people still care. So it is gonna be another memoir about growing up in Florida, really poor, and all of my like weird attempts to like claw my family out of poverty. And basically when I was writing High Risk Homosexual, because the like arc was shame to pride related to queerness, I feel like I didn't get to write about money as much as I wanted to. And so, but it was like something like hovering in the background. And so now with this next book, I want to write a lot about money. So it's gonna, open with like my house getting broken into when I was 13. But I was so broke back then that like the burglar didn't even steal anything from me. To doing, sex work, to trying to be YouTube famous. Just like it was really embarrassing. All sorts of things. And ultimately, I think, I don't know, I feel like I feel like I don't gotta tell anybody I'm not rich. But I feel like I've sort of I've been able to carve a life for myself through writing, and through writing about being poor. And I guess I'm trying to process that, I found stability by writing about being poor. It just seems weird. And it's gonna be called Florida Boy.
Nice. I really appreciate that, because sometimes we don't want to write about that. My family, we're not rich as well. And it's something that sometimes people don't want to talk about it because there's some shame on it, but there's nothing, to be ashamed about. So thank you for doing that. And I wanted to ask you before we go in officially to the Q&A, because we have so many questions. We have 8 questions, lined up right now. And what other conversations are in conversation with yours that you can think of?
What books are in conversation with mine?
Yeah, that you can recommend us, or that you think they're in conversation with you.
Sure. Off the top of my head, I would say Chris Gonzalez wrote a book. It's a fiction. Called I'm Not Hungry, But I Could Eat.
My favorite.
It's so good. And it's a collection of stories all about bisexual Puerto Rican men. And it's really funny. So I would suggest that. Maybe, I don't know, it always feels like, who am I to say that these books I'm in conversation with, but maybe in my wildest dreams, my book would be in conversation with Janet Mock, who wrote Redefining Realness and Surpassing Certainty. Those are memoirs about growing up as a biracial trans woman in Hawaii. If you don't know Janet Mock, she's most famous for Pose. She wrote Pose, or she's a writer on Pose. I'm like looking at my bookshelf. Oh, and then one more, I would say Saeed Jones' How We Fight for Our Lives is such a beautiful memoir. And he's also a Southern writer. So growing up as queer in the South. Oh, and I'm reading right now Punch Me Up to the Gods by Brian Broom, I want to say his last name. And as I'm reading it, I'm like, oh my God, we've had so many of the same experiences. But his book is through the perspective of being a Black man in, oh my God, where did he grow up? I want to say Philadelphia, but that could be wrong. So I would say those are the books mine is in conversation with.
And I want to add Yakira Diaz, Ordinary Girls. Of course.
Okay, duh, yeah, yeah. And I just read that when I was in PR, and I was like, oh my God, I'm having like such a transcendent experience reading this. Yeah, Hakire is amazing writer. And I strive to weave as much like explicit politics into my writing like she does. Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with Chris Gonzalez as well. It's phenomenal, and also the comedy and the humor on it. It's fantastic. So everyone go and buy all of these books as well. But first, Edgar's. First, Edgar's. Thank you, Edgar. So one more last question from me, and then we're gonna go to the officially to the Q&A from the students. What would you say to college Edgar or to young self right now? What advice will you give her, him, them?
Yeah. So it was weird in that I would say in college, but also in high school. In college and in high school, you know, I grew up pretty poor. I also was like pretty insecure. And as like kind of a coping mechanism, I think I became really bitchy. And I was like, for example, if I didn't get invited to a party in high school, I would be like, oh, because those people are corny and I'm actually better than them and this and that. And what I would tell myself is, you're right. Hold on to that because that really protected me. And nobody else around me was hyping me up and I had to hype myself up. And so I'm kind of glad that I formed that like protective measure. And I would basically, if I were to talk to a younger me, I would just be hyping myself up. I'd be like, you're amazing, you're great. Everybody else is like crazy. They don't know what they're talking about. If they don't want to hang out with you, that's because they suck. You rule. I would just, I would hype myself up. That's what I would do.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask you the first. Thank you for that. We all need those reminders. Yes, we also, and we don't hear them enough. We really don't, especially in this country. That like the country, it tells us on an everyday basis that we're not enough, and that we don't belong here. So this first question is from a fellow Puerto Rican and a dear friend of mine, Professor Salvador Vidal Ortiz. He's at American University. So he asks us, or you rather, one of the elements I appreciate from the discussion of sex spaces like Club Pulse in Orlando is imagination as a parallel between the sexual space, the failed erotics of those homophobic, and the joy of celebrating one's identity through sex. Gayness has been so sanitized that having a book that thinks public sex plus space is very important in an era of normative marriage, right? So his question is, could the use of homosexual be also a way to work through sexuality in the title? So much of queerness is defined by gender disruptions, and again, sexuality remains on the background. Could you say if you're trying to revive the category homosexual beyond the story of PrEP and that prescription message? So basically, your take between sexuality, how you're working homosexuality, etc., and sex, because you do write about sex, and I think that you do so very creatively, particularly, that chapter on PrEP for sure.
Yeah, I mean, so earlier I said when I was 13, I don't know if I would have picked up a book that says high risk homosexual, but that would only be because I would have been afraid of being seen with it. But I would have seen it at a bookstore and I would have been like, oh my God, I really want to read this. Damn, I wish I could, maybe I would have bought it and like ripped the cover off or something. I don't know. The reason I say that is because for me, at the same time, oh my gosh, not somebody calling me. Somebody was calling me, sorry. at the same time, I kind of like that a little bit. I kind of like the idea of being aspirational in that way, of a kid being like, oh, I want to read this someday, and what like questions that might like trigger inside them. And so for that reason, I love that it says just homosexual in giant letters. And in fact, my one thing that I said to the cover designer was, can you make homosexual bigger? That was like my one note. Regarding sex, I'll say the two chapters that I'm most like explicit about sex in are the one called High Risk Homosexual, which was about going on PrEP, and one about going to a gay bathhouse in Orlando called Club O. And I actually wrote that chapter. It's called Boys Club. That was going to be the original title. I wrote that in undergrad during one of my creative nonfiction classes, like a week after it happened. That's why a lot of the details are like seem so vivid. It's because I wrote it right away. And in that way, writing has like actually pushed me to be a braver, bolder person. Because basically I was in this creative writing class and my professor was like, all right, next week, y'all have to turn in stories. And I was like, well, I don't know what to write about. But I remember that I really wanted to go to Club Orlando back then, but I was too ashamed to, because I was like, oh, if I go to a gay bathhouse, I'm gonna be like fulfilling all of these like stereotypes. I'm gonna be like that kind of gay person. But because I was in this class, like sort of got to use the excuse of like, oh, I'm just gonna go there and like be like a reporter almost. That pushed me and that gave me the freedom to like, okay, I'm gonna do this thing that I have always wanted to do, but I'm just gonna like pretend that I'm just writing an assignment for class. And yeah, I guess in that way goes to show just like how fearful and how deeply that fear is ingrained in a lot of us, that like, I don't know if I weren't a writer, if I would have gone. Yeah. And so it kind of pushed me out of my shell. And maybe we need to see more like really explicitly. I know it's also complicated because for a long time, if it was a queer story, it was either like our narrative of suffering or it was something like really, really sexual. And there wasn't a lot of like in between. So maybe I was trying to like strive towards that. Like, I want to write about sex, but like as an actual person, not just like, I don't know, like a caricature. I don't know if I answered the question.
You did, and you addressed, the importance of Club Orlando and it's such different experience from polls from I totally when I mispronounce the club in Riverside too. So clubbing also, like these spaces that Tishan. So
was I was like, if a queer kid reads this, then they can like sort of like, it's like I'm like their little tour guide. And I can like show them what this space is. And I can actually maybe be like a avatar for them. Because when I went, I was really, really afraid. And by the time I left Club O, the bathhouse, I was like, oh, wait, this place that everybody says is evil, that if you go to this kind of place, you're like bad. This might kill you because you're gonna get an STD. I actually went, and not only did I not die, but I had a good time and everybody was really nice to me. And so I really wanted to do that for, I don't know, a little queer Latinx kid.
Thank you.
That's awesome, thank you. And Angel Lagunas is asking, there's two questions over here, and what do you recommend for writers who want to do an MFA in short stories or fiction, but you don't want to pay for it? Also, from Latina to Latina, how does one enter writing a book?
Sure. I would say you already know, it seems, that you should find a fully funded program. Just because, some of these places will charge you $100,000 to study writing. And like, if you're rich, hooray for you, you could do that. But you don't want to graduate and then not be able to like pay your student loans and then just never be able to write. I would suggest if you have never taken a writing class, to start there. There's a lot of different places where you can do that, either for not like too much money, or you could get a scholarship. Some of these places are Catapult and Hugo House. Catapult and Hugo House. You can, take a creative writing class there, and there's so many different classes that you can take, and they basically replicate what an MFA is if you're in a workshop. So I would recommend doing that. I would also suggest just doing a lot of self-education, because frankly, a lot of what the MFA did teach me a lot of things, but I also had to teach myself a lot. And I think I actually ended up teaching myself more than, no disrespect to the MFA, but I was one of the few queer Latinx people. A lot of the books that I was assigned didn't necessarily help me in writing my work. What I learned in the MFA were craft things like structure, narrative arcs, characterization, tone, blah, blah, blah. But I had to go out and read as many queer Latinx books on my own, and ultimately those are what taught me more. And not just queer Latinx books, because frankly, there aren't a ton, but queer books written by writers of color, Janet Mock, Said Jones, Ocean Vuong, all of those books taught me more. So I recommend that. And I would also recommend just writing every day. Starting, or not, it doesn't have to be every day, just have some sort of writing practice. Yeah, without the pressure of publishing at first. Just write what makes you what you enjoy writing. Do that for a little bit, and play around in that space before you enter a space where people are telling you who to be and what to do and how to do it. Yeah, because when I entered my MFA, I was so just grateful to be there that they flew me there. Well, they didn't fly me there, but they fully funded it. That I was I'll do anything anybody tells me to do. Oh, these are all professional writers. I guess I should just listen to them. And ultimately that was a disservice to me, because it obscured my voice. Because this is a very common MFA thing. I was writing for the workshop rather than writing for my audience. Here's a piece of advice. Figure out who you want to write for and write for them, Yeah.
That's true. And we can send other links as well later on. There's the Writer Center in Bethesda that is just right here in DC, and Bona as well. They have great workshops and everything. So thank you, Edgar, for sharing that.
Oh, and I want to also say this one is super helpful for me. Find a writing community, whether it's in person or even on Twitter. I know that on Twitter, I follow a lot of queer Latinx writers, a lot of Latinx writers in general, and just seeing them post their stories, both I'm happy to read their stories, and it also is oh, I guess they got published there. Maybe I can publish there. And people are always posting about grants, fellowships. Most of what I've learned about the publishing industry, I've learned by just being on Twitter and seeing what other people are up to, and being okay, I guess I can do that. So I would recommend that as well.
And follow Edgar for sure, everywhere.
Oh, well, thank you for this writing advice that I I definitely myself should follow. And also thank you, Edgar, once again. I mean, one of the comments from one of our and participants here, sharing that they also sold fruta in high school, right? I mean, again, this, writing about being poor, working poor in this country, right? So I'm gonna tie two questions. One by an anonymous participant about how did your brother, he read your book and how, if so, what was his reaction? And then the other one from Hannah Weston, how did growing up in a machista culture impact your journey of accepting your authentic self?
Yeah, so I don't know if my brother has read my book. I gave him a copy of it, so he has it.
Okay.
I know he's read my writing before. The thing is, I wasn't too stressed about what he would think, because I don't think that I really write about him too much, except for one chapter.
Yeah.
And in that chapter, I do write about us a lot, but it is nothing that, like, he was there for all of it. And I tried as best as I could to be as generous as I could with him, with really every character, but with him in particular. And so, yeah, I haven't been too stressed about what his reaction would be. I gave him my book, like, I want to say 2 months ago.
Oh,
So,
recent, yes.
And then how did growing up in a machista culture impact my journey to Pride? I mean, it had everything to do with it, because a machista culture taught me, it teaches everybody, you can, or it teaches men specifically, you can, drink as much beer as you want, have fight whoever you want, have as much sex with women as you want. And you should want those things. And if you don't want those things, then that's a problem. And so for a lot of my life, I was like, especially when I was younger, I was like, those were the things that I was probably most insecure about. I was like, why don't I want these things? Why don't I, why is it so hard for me to follow these rules of machista culture? Don't be feminine, be a man, don't wear makeup, don't wear pink, don't listen to Beyonce, especially not this latest album. And so a lot of my journey was having to unlearn all of those rules, and be first recognized, actually, I don't really want, all of these like rewards that I would get, like having sex with women, I don't really want all these things. So first I had to recognize that. And second, I had to figure out what I did want. Because I had a lot of role models for how to be a man, but I didn't have any role models for how to be a queer person. And so a lot of my journey was finding those role models, whether it was, somebody else in drama club in high school, or, this drag queen that I met when I was 17, who like showed me like around like Orlando and gay bars. And also RuPaul. Like, I just had to find queer role models everywhere. Yeah, so that's how it impacted me.
There's also another question about, now that you talk about RuPaul, that I think we're gonna end up with that one. Well, it's 6 p.m. Do we have time, Manuel, to finish one with one question?
Can we ask this one last question?
Okay, and we'll close it up. Yeah, in an episode of your memoir, you mentioned spending time watching RuPaul's Drag Race in your grieving process. What was an attractive about that at that time, and do you still watch it? And also, what's your favorite J-Lo movie? I love that question to end up.
That's like, these are two questions that people always ask me. They always ask me, what does your mom think? And then what's your favorite J-Lo movie?
Yes.
Yeah. She's my second mom, I guess. What attracted me to Drag Race was, it was right after the pole shooting, when I had just started to come out of like my shame. And after the pole shooting, it's like all of that shame flooded back. And suddenly, if I was learning to not be afraid, I was afraid again, times 1,000. And so seeing a TV show, a hugely successful TV show, with queer people, with trans people, even though we can talk about, you know, I don't know if we have time right now, but, you know, there's also problematic history to trans representation on RuPaul's Drag Race. But at the time, you know, and then the other thing was that I was banned from that gay bar in Riverside, and that would have been a space where I would have seen other queer people. Drag Race was just like a place where it was just like so joyous and bright, and everybody was just like as queer as possible, and that queerness was celebrated. And so that's what appealed. And, you know, I think we can critique Drag Race in many ways, but it is also a show where a queer Black man has given a platform to tons of queer people of color and has given them a way to like make a living and like, you know, skyrocketed them towards like, you know, stardom and stability. And so all of those things were just really, really appealing to me. I was like, oh, here are people being gay. I'm in Riverside. It was kind of a small town. I can't even go to the small town gay bar. At least I have like this show where for like 1 hour, I can forget about, you know, Pulse. I can forget about being banned. I can forget about, you know, all of the homophobia and racism that, you know, experience on a daily basis and just like tune out. And so, yeah, that's what I loved about Drag Race.
The favorite JLo movie? Yeah.
Oh, my favorite JLo movie, and I should rewatch it, is Enough, which is like a weird one. It's like kind of a rom-com, kind of not, because it gets really dark. But I like that she learns karate and kills her ex-husband. So yeah, I'm gonna say Enough.
Or Marry Me with Maluma. No, that was pretty bad.
I'm going to say Selena, obviously.
Selena's
oh, yeah,
like the
Selena.
Yeah, I mean, in reality, it probably is Selena, but it's just like too obvious, you know.
Doesn't make her famous. Edgar, Amanda, do you want to say anything else? Oh, sorry. Like, before we, okay.
No, I just want to thank you, Edgar, for, you know, sharing this queer wisdom with us, your journey, your life, your joy, right? For inspiring us to keep going in fear and, you know, in the good times, for sharing with us a little bit about Nicaragua, Puerto Rico, Florida. And we're so happy and thrilled that you're going to keep on writing. And so we're going to keep teaching and reading your work. Thank you. Gracias de corazón.
I really appreciate that. That means the world to me. And Mama, yo eso.
Que sí están leyendo mi libro, dile.
Sí. And we carry it in the avión y se nos quedan viendo. Yes, I raised homosexual.
Oh, I carry this with pride, Edgar. No, everywhere. No, y muchas gracias. Thank you so much, Edgar. It's just a pleasure, you know, just having this conversation. And I hope the students that join us, I don't know, have some inspiration for writing, for life, or anything. So I really appreciate it. Muchas gracias.
Listen, thank you so much. And listen, if I made it, you know, y'all can do it too. So just don't give up. And remember, when you feel insecure, you know, hype yourself up. Everybody else sucks, you rule. You're right, you're amazing.
Thank you, Edgar. Well, everyone, and I put a lot of links in the chat so you can check them out, or you can just ask us, Professor Payer and I, about anything. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to the Cisneros Institute and everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night and happy National Coming Out Day again.
Yes,
Yeah, happy National Coming Out Day. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.